Diverse, diverse, diversity, 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 diversity.
Diversity, diverse.
Diversity.
Diversity.
Paroled Mr. James Schoenfeld. He was convicted of kidnapping 26 kids. I love you, but what planet did you just parachute in from? Bulsara. So your boss said you just ignored a whole line of cases. Was he wrong?
I'm not going to call a colleague wrong.
But what does poetry do for you?
I was taken with poetry at a very young age.
Oh.
Do you believe that that males should compete against females in sports?
Judge Coggins, you used to work for Governor Jerry Brown,
That is correct, Senator.
and I believe you advised him on issues regarding parole.
As the governor under the California Constitution, when the parole board recommends that a inmate be paroled, that matter then comes before the governor to determine whether he's going to reverse that recommendation.
Did you
Or
advise him on parole?
I was not advising him. What I provided was all background information. So the nature and circumstances of the particular case that was before us. I was looking at the correctional file. In addition, I was
Do you
reviewing.
remember a parolee named James Schoenfeld?
I don't, Senator.
Okay. You talked a lot about, as did you all appropriately, about juveniles in your testimony. Governor Brown in 2015 paroled Mr. James Schoenfeld. He was convicted of kidnapping 26 kids, juveniles, and burying them alive. Were you with Governor Brown then? Judge?
I left in 2015, so I'm unsure of the time period in which that occurred.
This happened in 2015.
That name is not familiar to me. What I can say is those decisions
Do you
are.
remember the case?
I do not.
Okay. When it happened, it got a lot of publicity in California. Did you call Judge Brown or Governor Brown and say, Governor, I love you, but what planet did you just parachute in from? Why have you done this?
I did not.
Do you agree with this decision?
I would need to look at the file. I don't know the context. I don't know the background, the insight, and the decision that Governor Brown would make is whether the parolee poses an unreasonable risk to the safety of the community. And
Do you think kidnapping 26 juveniles and burying them alive presents a risk to the community?
I certainly believe that if that individual is convicted of those crimes, which it sounds like he was,
yeah.
he would be a risk to the community.
But you don't have an opinion about whether Governor Brown did the right thing?
Again, Senator, I would have to be able to look at the complete file and all of the considerations required of the governor, who ultimately makes the decision.
So he might have done the right thing, in your opinion?
I would want to look at the complete file in order to make an assessment.
All right, Judge Bulsara. Do you remember a case called J&J Sports Products v. If I mispronounce it, sir, please correct me. Ferraris?
I do recall that case, Senator, yes.
Okay, it was pretty recent, 2020. You're a magistrate judge, right?
I am.
And your decisions have to be reviewed by a federal district court judge?
That's correct.
Okay. You made a ruling in that case, and the district court reversed you.
In part, yes.
And the district court said, quote, these are the judge's words, not mine, that you ignored, quote, a large collection of cases in this district holding that essentially identical allegations are sufficient to state a claim. So your boss said you just ignored a whole line of cases. What's going on here?
Well, Senator Kennedy, the way I recall that case was there's a split in authority about claims that can be brought under the Copyright Act. And there were, in addition to the cases that the district judge cited, there was a whole bevy of other cases going in the other direction. And the Court of Appeals had not ruled on it.
Yeah.
And
But the judge didn't say you looked at both line of cases and decided one was more accurate than the other. He said you totally ignored a line of cases. Did you just disagree with those line of cases?
Senator, I would never ignore a whole line of cases, and I know that was a very lengthy opinion that I issued, and it's my practice in the 1,000 opinions.
I'm going to run out of time. I'm sorry to cut you off, Judge. I don't mean any disrespect. The district court judge says you ignored those cases.
I would respectfully say, as I don't...
Was he wrong?
I'm not going to call a colleague wrong, but I can say that in every case where I write a lengthy opinion, I read all of the applicable authorities. And I know in that particular situation, there's a line of other cases that I have read, and I did so in all of my decisions, and I can expect that I did so in that one as well.
But why did you ignore the line of cases is my point. I can understand you saying, well, there are two line of cases and they conflict, and I find the reasoning more persuasive in this line. The district judge reversed you, said you just totally ignored them. That worries me.
He reversed me only in part, Senator, and in those line of cases, I think there's a split of authority at the district court level. There's no governing Court of Appeals decision or a U.S. Supreme Court decision, which my oath requires me to follow.
Okay. Thank you, folks.
I raise the question every time during these hearings that is important to me, and I think it's important for the federal judiciary, if you're fortunate enough to be confirmed, what you would do to enhance additional diversity in your courtrooms. And we'll start with Judge Bulsara.
Thank you, Senator. The answer to the first question is yes. And on the second question, what I try and do as a magistrate judge, and what I would do if I'm so lucky enough to be confirmed, is I try and recruit at a broad scope of law schools and not keep a limited list of law schools. But I also want to be transparent in my hiring, which is to put positions publicly so that anyone can apply who's a law graduate and not limited to sort of informal conversations or connections that people may have.
I agree with your value statement. I think diversity is an absolute strength of our country. And when our judicial system mirrors the public in which we serve, it does enhance the judicial confidence and confidence in our system.
Thank you, Senator. I would agree with the value statements articulated in your question. I believe it's important for the profession of practicing law as well as for the bench, and would continue to support that if I would have the honor of the nomination of United States District Court Judge. I played a role in our state bar in South Dakota, has taken tours since my term as president of the state bar to Indian country. South Dakota is 9% to 10% Native American. And our state bar as a value has determined it's important to have outreach to grade schools, high schools, middle schools in Indian country to encourage potentially careers in the practice of law. So it's something that I believe is important. I would agree with Judge Coggins, not only for clerk hiring to look at all aspects of candidates, to look at all kinds of diversity in candidates, but also just straight up mentoring of young lawyers and being involved in your community.
Thank you. I would agree with the value statement as well. I guess what I would say with regard to hiring law clerks is I think it's important to hire folks that have a diverse background for their benefit personally, but also for the benefit of the court. I think that exchange of ideas, I also think we serve diverse communities, and so it does help the trust in our system and build integrity in our system when people come into court and they see a diverse group of people in the courtroom as well. The best part about focusing and I guess caring about diversity when you're hiring law students or hiring law clerks is that those are the folks that go on to become leaders in our community, leaders in our profession. And so by promoting diversity at that level, I think you really promote it throughout the profession, and it's certainly very important.
What's your view of the social media situation in America? Is it a problem?
Well, I can't speak to it on a general basis. I can only talk about what's happened in my courtroom and what I've seen in the 7 years as a magistrate judge. I've had the opportunity to preside over many cases at pleas where it involves child pornography offenses that involve activities that took place over social media. So we have seen it in our court as a way of there are criminal activities that take place, but as to the policy issues, I defer to you and the other members of Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I have seen in the juvenile court concerns about criminal activity occurring and posted on social media, and the attempts to address that issue. I leave the work to the policymakers as to that, but I do recognize that it is of concern for our juveniles especially.
Thank you, Senator. I would concur in that I do believe it is something of concern for juveniles. I can say with respect to my experience, 24 years largely as a civil litigator, it's changed the practice of law with respect to discovery. Certainly things are more public than I think I could ever have imagined when I started practicing law 24 years ago. With respect to policy decisions, I would of course defer to this committee.
Thank you for that question. Early in my career, I did employment law work, and some of that work was it was early in social media's birth, too, and some of that was trying to promote having appropriate policies and thinking about how social media would be used. And certainly, it has evolved well beyond where it was at when I was making those speeches 15 years ago. I certainly recognize the issue, and I'd agree with my fellow nominees that it is an important policy issue, and I'm glad that Congress is looking at it.
I want to ask a little bit about your experiences that make you confident that you'll be able to both quickly and effectively make a transition to the federal bench, given the pace and caseload that exists in the district.
Thank you, Senator. I transitioned to the bench as an administrative law judge almost 10 years ago. And during that time, I presided over cases that involved applying federal law, and those cases could be, and at least one was appealed to the district court. Those cases came from 1,500 different state and local agencies implying laws, different laws, varying laws from those cases. I learned to write comprehensive, well-reasoned, and understandable decisions during that period of time, and I also learned to preside over numerous court proceedings. From there, after being there for a significant period of time, I transitioned to the state court, and in that time, I have continued to become very familiar with different areas of law. I was assigned to the juvenile court, presiding over juvenile dependency and juvenile delinquency cases. I never practiced in that area of law and was appointed as presiding judge of the juvenile court, supervising judges in an area of law that was very new to me.
Congratulations on your nominations. In addressing the fitness to serve of nominees who come before any of the 5 committees on which I sit, I ask the following 2 initial questions, and we'll just go right down the line with Judge Bulsara. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
I think for all of us, I continuously encourage my staff, and it applies to myself, to be creative and to go to refer to the arts as a way to maintain a certain equilibrium. Is that what poetry does for you? I mean, in fact, what does poetry do for you?
It does, Senator. That's what poetry does for me. I was taken with poetry at a very young age, and recently had some published for the first time in my life. But I take great interest in poetry. It relaxes me. I believe it stimulates my mind. I'm an amateur poet, to be crystal clear. I'm an amateur poet, but I'm a big fan of the great American poets, Mary Oliver, Ted Kooser, former poet laureate of the United States, and Jim Harrison.
Do you have a favorite poet?
It would probably be Mary Oliver, Senator. She would be my favorite poet.
Oh,
Now, do you share this view that sanctuary cities ought to be rewarded and never have federal funds withheld for refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement?
Thank you, Senator. I think, as you may appreciate, NAPABA has several 100,000 members.
Sure.
I'm only one of those members. I'm not an officer director. I'm certainly not familiar with the class of statements that you're addressing or any press releases to that effect, and I've never read any NAPABA statement on these particular items that you've identified, so I can't.
So you were not aware they had taken this position?
I was not,
Do
Senator.
you agree with that position that they've taken?
Senator, I can't agree or disagree with the position because the issues you've identified, not only do they come up in our courts, they're likely to come up in my court.
Actually, I'd push back on that. This is a legislative determination. This is almost impossible that it could come up in your court. And keep in mind, this is a core function of the federal government. It is only the federal government, under Article 1, Section 8, that has the authority over our immigration laws and consequently over the enforcement of those laws. This is the prerogative of the federal government. And yet you're saying that a local jurisdiction that refuses to cooperate with that should not have federal funds withheld, or the entity is saying that rather. Now, a legislative determination, again, I don't think this is something that could or would come up. But let's move on. NAPABA has also opposed legislation, H.R. 734, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act of 2023. Do you believe that males should compete against females in sports?
Again, Senator Lee, I can't comment one way or another about that topic, in part because in Long Island, just as an example, there are states and there are local and county legislation that's been passed in the recent weeks. Those laws are under challenge. Those cases are being brought in the Eastern District of New York. I simply cannot comment about issues that bear on litigation that are before me.
I understand that you're declining to answer. Keep in mind, you are a member of an entity that has made those statements. And if you can't comment on those statements, then perhaps, as a judge and as someone sitting for a nomination to be a lifetime appointed federal judge, then perhaps the answer should be that you shouldn't be a member of the organization. But it does raise an inference as to whether you do agree with them, and I note for the record that you're declining to do that.
Now in reverse order, please, I'd like you to characterize your approach to First Amendment cases.
I think in my 17 years of legal practice and my 6 years on the bench, I have not had direct First Amendment cases that I've dealt with. If I were to be so honored to receive this position, I would consider each case that came before me, the facts of that case, apply applicable law and binding precedent.
Thank you, Senator. In my 24 years practicing law, I don't believe I've had a First Amendment case, but if I would be honored enough to fill the role of United States District Court judge, the First Amendment is the cornerstone, I believe, of our democracy. I would faithfully apply precedent handed down by the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals that would be applicable to me, or the United States Supreme Court, in applying those important freedoms.
Senator, in my 10 years as a judicial officer, I have applied federal law to cases before me. That law has not been the First Amendment, but I would be consistent as I applied those laws in those cases in applying the binding precedent to the record that was before me.
Senator, I've had several First Amendment cases. My approach has been the same one that my colleagues here have indicated they would follow, or the one that I follow. I'd only add that it's my regular practice to keep up with regularly issued opinions by the Second Circuit and Supreme Court. It's an ever-evolving, complicated area of the law, and it's important to stay current.
Judge Coggins, in your opening statement, we each now have 5 minutes to ask questions. In your opening statement, you did something that is fairly unique in this committee. You gave special recognition to your children and very kind words to your 13-year-old son in particular. It is interesting to note in your background and your resume the work that you've done with juveniles in the legal system. Can you make any general observations or help us to understand the challenges these young people are facing and how we should respond?
Absolutely. What I can say in California, and I think this is consistent across the country, is a recognition of a priority of public safety, but for juveniles also a priority for rehabilitation. And what I see in Sacramento County specifically, and in California and across the country, is collaboration and working on prevention, intervention, and treatment for juveniles. As you know, fentanyl is of concern in all communities for juveniles that come before the juvenile court. And I have been proud to work with state leaders and community partners in addressing the concerns around fentanyl, but also all of the prevention and treatment services for at-risk youth.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Kennedy?
we have a lot of time left.
Well,
Can
Senator-
we have a second round?
No. I mean, we would announce in advance if we were doing a second round, and I didn't do that. We haven't, historically, we don't do second rounds on nominees.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank the nominees, their family, and friends for being here today. With that, this meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee stands adjourned.